Hi, my name is Claudia Zapata. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a queer Chicanx scholar, curator, and zinester from Texas, currently living in DC. Today, I'm going to tell you about zines. So I've worked with zines for a couple of years now, and they come in various formats, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about their history, and I'm going to show you some examples from my personal collection, and then we're going to create our very own zine about the labor activist Emma Tenayuca. So let's begin. So what is a zine? Art historically, I would place zines under the medium of book arts and graphics. Characteristics of these works on paper are that they are photocopied and self-published. These works have a small edition run and do not have the formality of book standardization like an ISBN or an international standard book number. The usual markers for the formalization of a book are unavailable, same as what normally constitutes a magazine. For example, usually there are no ads in zines. Zines are handmade and inexpensive, and like all art, can take various forms in which the maker deems fit for translating their artistic objectives. Therefore, sizes range from micro to legal size paper. Their making is a labor of love for the exposure and sharing of content that is close to the maker's heart. Like any subculture's histories, zines have a varied origin story. But let's look at the term zine and when it first emerges. The science fiction circles are the birthplace of the zine term. The first is in the 1930s with The Comet, a science fiction zine published by the Science Correspondence Club in Chicago. Deaf scholar Louis Russell Chauvigny coined the official term for these publications as fanzines in 1940. As a heavy photocopy reliant medium, zines are also tied to the changes in reproduction technology. Chester Carlson's work with photocopying in 1938 is the predecessor for modern Xeroxing. As a patent attorney with chronic arthritis, he sought an improved mode of copying information rather than having to type and write everything by hand. Because zines are about marginalized groups and subcultures, there's a broad spectrum of output in this creative form. There's a zine genre called the slash zine. And this was an early media fanzine form related to two male characters in a romantic relationship. The slash comes from fusing the pairs. For example, Kirk / Spock from the television show Star Trek. The slash meant there was a romantic storyline. Queer content is ever present in zine culture as an alternative space of building communities. Joey Terrell's Homeboy Beautiful from 1978 was a short run zine from LA featuring the queer Chicano scene. Terrell describes this as an art project in magazine form, but I would definitely place this in a zine category. The aim of this work was to challenge the overwhelming whiteness in the gay scene and was a very playful take on Chicano masculinity and gender. Punk zines are dedicated to a specific musical genre and are a prominent staple of zine culture. Maximum Rock and Roll from San Francisco, beginning in 1982, featured punk and hardcore music news and just stopped publishing in 2019. They were a media source deemed as, quote, made by punks for punks, end quote. The zine form allowed this underground culture to share information among like-minded people where mainstream media failed to recognize their interests or they had no desire for corporate intervention. Another music-centered zine was a Riot Grrrl zine. Zines are a part of a multimedia effort alongside broader movements, such as the punk scene. They are creative outputs among radical movements that range across media, from writing, visual art, performance, and music, and the zine can act as the anthology or the written archive for this activity. The zines were an instrumental part of the Riot Grrrl movement of the 1990s, with the publications featuring information about women in the punk scene and feminist literature and art. Molly Newman from the band Bratmobile started a zine called Riot Girl. Other Pacific Northwest bands like Bikini Kill are famous for their zine activity as well. Texas has a major zine scene with Chicanx, Latinx, and Mexican American artists producing zines dedicated to feminist rights, veganism, art, and literature. I've worked on a zine project called Chingazine since 2012 as part of an arts collective called the Butter Chingon Collective. Members, Claudia Zapata, James Weezer, and I have created this anthology zine where we invite Latinx artists from all over the US and Mexico to contribute artwork, designs, and doodles. Collecting and making zines is very much about holding the zine and having a very specific rhythm to your viewing experience. So let's take a look at some zines close up. So this one is called Bajito and Suavecito Photo Zine. It was created by Luz and Magdalena Flores. They took photos of classic cars in California, Chicago, Brooklyn, and Ripan, Mexico. This one is really nice bleed, so all these great quality glossy photos, they reach all the way to the end of the page, so it has a professional quality to this scene. This one's called Deep in the Heart of Texas. It was part of a larger installation that I did in San Antonio, Texas. The work was discussing queer people who have been murdered, and the zine featured images of the deceased as well as information about their case. I used different colors for the covers, and it's my signature Texas license plate. So this one is Chicana Vegan Issue 2. This is a series that Susie Gonzalez, who's a very prolific zinester, works on. And this has a nice heavy paper to it on its cover. And this is information about Chicanx veganism. There's recipes, several contributors discuss imagery related to speciesism, cultural traditions, foodways, and just general environmental justice information. This one's called Beating as Medicine. This one just came out in 2020, and I bought it from Red Planet Books, this great comic book store related to Native creators in New Mexico. It has this nice heavy cover as well. So all this is an anthology zine, so several contributors provided their own stories related to beating and how it affects their lives. So this is a no-staple one-page zine by Isabel Ancastro, very prolific zinester out of San Antonio. She really likes doing these one-pagers. This one features items from Mama Margie's, is a Mexican restaurant found in San Antonio. So the one-page zine has this slit down the middle, and that's how you're able to do these folds. You kind of fold it in, fold it one more time, and then that's how you create this sequence for the reader. So this one's 11 by 17 zine called Excuse Me, Sir. So I created this as part of the Transamerica show. The McNay Museum commissioned this, and they wanted a zine that explained to readers what is a zine while also talking about queer identities and gender. So this one is not normally what I would do in terms of having so much text, but there was a desire on the institution's behalf to be more of a resource or a manual. So this one had kind of interesting orientation to the point where I put some arrows to explain to the viewers where to go from there. So I was trying to use as many panels as possible. The main point of making it so large is that I wanted to have this central poster when you opened up the zine. So it served as a zine slash poster, so it could have these multiple functions in your space. So usually zines end up in libraries, but I kind of wanted to blur this line of what is a graphic, what is a zine, what is a poster, what is a book, and to have something that really popped in the space. So there's several folds to this one, but no cuts, no staples. I personally prefer this kind of cleaner look, and then my signature license plate. So this one's a microzine created by San Antonio artist Ashley Mireles. this kind of accordion folding. It fits in the palm of your hand. And for the longest time, this was in my wallet because I was so afraid of losing it. And it was this nice little surprise. This one's very intimate and has these small little drawings. That's part of her practice. She often features people from behind. This one's Chingo Zine Let's Get Weird #7. It's a heavier pound paper for the cover. And staples that are very off-center. And this one features our logo, Puro Chingon Collective, that's who creates Chingo Zine. It features this little #7 on the side. We have a great graphic designer, Claudia Zapata, but this is an anthology zine. So we feature artists from all over the country. It's all in black and white. It's definitely related to being very affordable. So it's a little drawing that I did of a scorpion. I hate scorpions. And this one was really interesting as the editor because I always see people contribute images that are very much speak to one another, even though they're coming from disparate locations and disparate inspirations. You'd start seeing this common thread amongst the Latinx artists. So now you want to make a zine. Welcome. Some zines don't have a topic. They're just free-form sketches, but let's focus on a biographical or profile zine. This format can be about someone, and for this example, I'm choosing Emma Tenayuca. Who is Emma Tenayuca? Well, she was a labor leader in San Antonio, and she's not as widely known as you think. And a zine is a good way of researching something you're already interested in, or a way to discover new topics and sharing your interpretation of this knowledge. Basic information about Tenayuca is she was born in San Antonio on December 21st, 1916, and she died July 23rd, 1999 at 82. For Emma's bios, they focus primarily on her 1930s activism in her teens and 20s. My family is from San Antonio, so her story has very similar locations to what I can remember growing up. For example, she used to work at Harlandale High School, and that's where all of my family went to school, and a school that I passed by constantly while being on the South Side. So someone I know probably knows her, or probably knew her at one point. Anyway, her labor activism in the 1930s is her central historical recognition. Her prolific presence as a labor leader at such a young age is what is often cited as the most remarkable bit of information about her. In her teens, she was in leadership roles and arrested as part of the Fink cigar strike. This was an early women-led strike against the Fink Cigar Company for pay increase and improved working conditions. She cites her family, especially her father and her grandfather, as someone who informed her love for politics. They would frequent San Antonio's La Plaza del Zacate, now known as Milam Park, in front of Santa Rosa Hospital. Present day, this hospital has that famous Jesse Trevino mural, the Spirit of Healing mosaic from 1998. Whenever I would go to the South Side, I always knew I was getting closer because I would see that. So this park was an influential space for Tenayuca's political consciousness because during this era, people were sharing the political news from Mexico and beyond, where people would read political newspapers out loud, basically soapbox speakers. And Tenayuca recalls there were magonistas, or people who followed the ideology of Ricardo Flores Magon and Enrique Flores Magon, the Mexican anarchist brothers. So fleeing Porfiria in Mexico, the brothers were at one point living in San Antonio, Texas, where they published their newspaper, De Generación. While Ricardo Flores Magon died in 1922, his school of anarchist thought has lasted several generations. And Tenayuca's political consciousness was fueled by this, amongst other ideologies, as well as the 1929 Wall Street crash and the closing of the banks in 1932. She saw this as this fall of capitalism. Other political inspirations for her included the IWW, or the Industrial Workers of the World, also known as the Wobblies, a radical worker-led union based out of Chicago. She cites the CTM, the Confederación de Trabajadores de México, a confederation of unions in Mexico, as another inspiration. And later, Tenayuca would personally identify herself as a communist, a decision that would negatively affect her stance in several of the unions and would lead her to be eventually blacklisted and would result in her leaving San Antonio for California. And she would later come back, but she had to leave because she was getting death threats. She eventually held a leadership role in the National Workers Alliance in 1937. This communist-led movement was a national organization, and Tenayuca focused on class struggle effects on Mexican Americans and the undocumented, and she would combat the border patrol agents beating Mexicans, as well as fight for the creation of jobs and minimum wages. Her work with the pecan sheller strike is her most well-known political work. The 1938 pecan shellers in San Antonio was a result of a reduction of the shellers' wages and the substandard working conditions. Tenayuca led 6,000 to 8,000 estimated workers on strike as part of one of the largest labor walkouts in the state of Texas. The 5-week-long strike, which had up to an estimated 10,000 followers, these numbers fluctuate across several sources, just FYI. By the end, this was filled with police tear gassing strikers. Several people were jailed, including Tenayuca, which was a common occurrence for her. But most importantly, many of the strikers were women, and this action served as a vehicle for their personal empowerment and political activism. So people definitely recognize Emma Tenayuca in artwork. For example, Rupert Garcia has this image. It's currently on view at Smithsonian American Art Museum. And this is taken from the photo where she was in the jail cell. Interestingly, Tenayuca is misspelled in this print. But here you see her polka dot dress. This is very common. This is a very common scene for artists to pull. Melanie Cervantes of Dignidad Rebelde collective out of California. This is another common image artists use. This is when she was on the steps of San Antonio City Hall, and she has this fist raised. She's in this leadership position, and it's a great image. So you see this also in murals, and these are in San Antonio, and very similarly, she has this fist raised. And this is where you also see this reference to her nickname, La Pasionaria de Texas, de Texas. And this was her nickname, or the passionate one, associated with her. So you commonly see this kind of integrated in the artwork. And you also see images of her as part of this legacy of women, of special women, leaders, women who affected the community. And so this is another mural where she's really the prominent image. This is her face is right in the center of this mural. It's the lightest one. And then this more recent work is also a reference to a photograph. So this is a public artwork in San Antonio under a highway. And so Tenayuca is referenced in this space in the visual art realm in a very specific way. People reference her in photographs. People reference her with her fist up. She's mid-action. She's very youthful. And there's this centralization of her as a young leader. So with all that in mind, let's do it. So now it's time to make a zine. So you have all this information about Tenayuca. I would suggest doing a little bit more research, but now you have kind of something to work on. And now you know how people thus far have recognized her. So now let's start working on that zine. So we're going to do a 1-page zine. So this is an 8.5 by 11 heavy piece of paper. So this is a bone tool. So that's something that I'm going to use to make a crease on the paper. When it's a little heavier like that, it helps to make this really tight crease. So you just kind of scrape the paper, and then I'm going to fold it one more time. And that's basically what the zine is going to be. It's not so complicated. This is the easiest version of a zine. So that is the cover. So this is going to serve as the master copy. So this is a reference point. Image 1 and 2 are these kind of panels that I'm dictating are going to have 2 images. You can have one big image. It's really up to you. And then there's going to be a central image or / small poster. And this is what you will see when you open up the zine. And then there's the back cover, which can be whatever you'd like it to be. So these are the tools that I use when I'm drawing. It's just a mechanical pencil, and then I ink over it, and then I erase the mechanical pencil. It's not too complicated. It depends on the pens you prefer. And so then this is our master copy again, image 1, image 2, and then the central image. So I want to do the central image design first. So the other thing that you're going to need is a sketchbook or a piece of paper, whatever you prefer. And so I use the sketchbook as a little bit heavier paper, and so I'm going to work on this central design. Okay, so voila, I'm going to create this. It's created, so I sketched it out and then I inked it, and this is going to be the central image for the zine. So after this, I'm going to work on the other side of the zine. So now that this is done, so let's move on to that. So that one has 4 cells or 4 panels, and so I don't have a ruler. I'm just going to use my piece of paper, my master copy, and I'm just going to put these kind of guidelines to help me when I'm creating the images. So you can do this. This is just the most basic way of doing this, where you have the drawing and then you scan it, and that creates the zine, versus doing this in an image editing software. So I wanted to do kind of the most analog version of this. So what I'm doing is just creating the grid, basically, of what the inside of the zine looks like using this piece of paper. I didn't actually have a ruler, but it just makes sense to use the actual paper size. So now I have these 4 panels. So the important part of zines is knowing what's upside down and right side up. That's really the key. So in this case, the cover is one orientation, while the other 3 panels are another orientation. So that's key to understanding that when you're designing it. So that's my new design. So now I have the cover and the other 2 images and the back cover ready to go. So now I have my zine images. So now you're going to want to scan these 2 pieces of paper and make one piece of paper. So one is on one side, one is on the other. So that depends on the kind of copier you have. Really, it's just a matter of feeding this in and going from one-sided to 2-sided. That's pretty much it. It's not super complicated. It may take some time, it just depends on the copier, the printer. But that's basically what you're trying to do. You're trying to make one page that has 2 sides. That's it. So this one I actually wanted to color. When I designed it, I envisioned it in color. So this is the process of that. So this is what I did on my iPad. So this is something also you could do where you color it on your own. You can use markers or use crayons, whatever you want to, and then you scan that drawing in for me, I just like coloring on the iPad because it's just a little bit quicker, and I actually don't have all my supplies with me. And then it also allows you to do this whole process shot as well. And when I was designing this, I wanted it in color. I envisioned it in color. That's why this design in black and white, the text might get a little bit lost because I imagine punching the text up by making specific color choices. And I wanted it to be really bright, and again, I wanted it to reference Emma Tenayuca in a very specific way that was mentioning her life using certain designs of the pecan tree, the way that people will remember her by this nickname, La Pasionaria de Tejas. That's where that comes from. And so I wanted it to have this very colorful nature experience. And then, so this is the other side, and so I wanted to really make this punch too, because this, whenever you're at a zine table, you have, a couple of minutes to really catch someone's eye, and I really like things that are really bright and really punch out, whatever the zine is about. And so I wanted to really push it to the next level. You can also do black and white zines. They're equally as eye-catching, but I just like, exploring with color. And so that's kind of what's informing all these specific choices. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the designs in a minute or so. But so this is the process that informed me, is just kind of really thinking of how these colors balance all together with the other panels, and and thinking of the user looking at each of the panels in a subsequent way. So how does one inform the other experience? And so now I've printed out the zine in color, and so now it's the same issue as the other one, other black and white pages, is okay, turning these two pages into one page, two-sided, and then that's what we're going to fold eventually. So it's just a matter of it looking like this, in one page instead of just two pages. So now let's do that. Okay, so now we have this black and white one. So I decided to print it on this yellow paper just to make it punch, so it just wasn't on white paper. So this was the paper that I was using to fold and make the master copy. It's a little bit heavier, a little bit weight to it. And so this is what it looks like in black and white. I think yellow punches something, so I definitely like the yellow. I tend to use it a lot in my zines. So now I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to use that bone tool again to make the crease. Okay, and then I'm going to fold it one more time, right down the middle, image 1 and image 2, and then I'm going to use that bone tool okay, and so that's the zine. That's it. You're done. Okay, so that's, and then the central image. It's not super complicated. Image 1, image 2, central image. Back cover. Front cover. Done. Do the same thing for the colored version. This one you don't really need the bone tool, but you can if you'd like. I did it on just basic copier paper. So you fold it in half, crease, fold it one more time, crease. That's it. That's the zine. Boom. Image 1, image 2, central image. So these are zines. This is color version, black and white version. Your choice. So now you can call yourself a zinester. You finished. Congratulations. Zine 1, Zine 2. What are you gonna do? Nailed it. So you made a zine. Whoa. Okay. Welcome. You're a zinester now. I anoint thee a zinester. So let's go over why I decided to design my zine in a specific way. So I was looking at this Bolshevik print that's related to literacy. I really liked their borders, and RCEF, Royal Chicano Air Force, Ricardo Favela, and everybody, Rudy, all of the Louis the Foot, all of them have great borders. I've always noticed that in the prints. And so the borders, when I'm designing, help me confine the space, so I know I'm not going to go all the way to the edge of the page and things get cut off. So it's just something to frame the image. And then it's also something that I like doing because I just like a lot of mark making personally. So the pecan tree has a specific leaf. And so that's this image in the upper right hand corner. That's what's in the background of this design. So my design, this is the central image of the zine that can basically serve dual purposes. It can be a poster, and it's also this kind of, it's a zine. So I created that background from the pecan trees, obviously because it's reference to the pecan shellers movement and how important pecans were in general for Tenayuca. And that's where the color definitely plays a big role. You know, if you're in black and white, you would kind of get this, but I think the color and, like, you know, the accents of brown and things like that, that's really in order to speak about pecans. And then this little guy in the bottom, the armadillo, I really like alebrijes. Alebrijes are these small, well, they can vary, you know, I've seen really big ones, but they're primarily small wooden sculptures. They're very famous in Oaxaca, but as of now, they're already all throughout Mexico. And they're intricately painted, they're very bright. And I like all the color choices in this design, this kind of cacophony of design. That definitely influences all my thinking in terms of my color theory. So there's an artist named Ruth Moda that I follow on Instagram, and I really liked her kind of like POWs, like comic book informed onomatopoeic design frameworks. So that's why I chose this as the cover. And originally I was going to add that exclamation in the front because it miro nomás is in Spanish, and you would need this exclamation in the front upside down in order for it to be quote unquote proper Spanish. But looking through Emma Tenayuca's oral history, there's one on UTSA in their archives. She was talking about how she was always at odds with her Spanish teachers, and that her Spanish was quote unquote incorrect for them because they were from another region. And so I originally added it, and then I decided not to, because to show that I had forgotten to put the exclamation point. It was more like a Chicano kind of interpretation. It's like Pocho Spanish, like, oh, I forgot. It's like, oh, okay. It's just one of those things, because throughout a lot of Chicano, Chicanx, Chicana artwork, you do see variations of Spanish language, and it's not always quote unquote correct. So mira nomás is a phrase that I remember hearing quite a bit when someone was like, oh, wow, look at that. Like, that's really cool. It literally translates to look no more, but it was always something to talk about, something that was like unbelievable. And so I was like, okay, well, imagine this as a series, as a zine series, because zines are very much about the serial nature. Like there's one and then subsequent issues. Like, for example, Chingazine, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. There's all these variations to it. And so I decided, okay, imagine if I was doing a series called Miro No Mas, and that's where I profile it. people that I thought were really interesting or unbelievable or remarkable. So I made it issue 1, and I put the year. So I remember I didn't put these markers of like years, and usually I don't put page numbers and things like that for like the one pagers, but early on that became very important. Once you start like archiving the zine with libraries and things like that, they actually do want to know what year did this come out. That's like very helpful. And then the bottom is this license plate I like to use, mainly because as a Texan, I always like referencing Texas. And now that I don't live there, I definitely like to call it out quite a bit. And I also love aliens. Like, that's just a fact. So this is a photo of me when I was visiting Roswell. Like as a child of the 90s, aliens were just everywhere. It was part of this experience of the X-Files and Scully and queer identities and being a queer person and connecting with kind of alien experience. It's just something I like. It's a thing. So I try to incorporate aliens quite a bit in my artwork. And so in this signature plate, I just put it out as the back cover of my zines, the kind of form of putting a signature. So this image 1 and 2 of my zine. So this is Ricardo Flores. This is like my interpretation of Ricardo Flores Magón. Ricardo Flores Magón and Emma Tenayuca, and oftentimes political activists, you often see their photographs of them in jail. And that's a lot of times they're not super happy, obviously. They're downtrodden. It's always the kind of like bad time. Obviously, that's why they're being remembered. So for image 1 and 2, I decided to go with rethinking how you perceive prisoners, because these figures, Emma Tenayuca and then Ricardo Flores Magón, oftentimes you always see them in reference to imprisonment and jail, and trying to rethink them in these different spaces and rethink them outside of their constant work. Their work is why they're famous. Obviously, their toil for helping the oppressed, but kind of seeing them as these fun people and really thinking about them not as these kind of untouchable icons with no accessibility, but something that kind of that makes them more accessible, and just generally like a ludic interpretation of things. And so this one, Feliz cumpleaños a ti, happy birthday to you. This is in relation to Emma Tenayuca and her oral history. She talks about never getting a birthday cake or celebrated because her birthday was so close to Christmas. And so it was a big deal when her family actually did recognize her birthday. And so this scene is kind of like, okay, if Ricardo Flores Magón went to Emma Tenayuca's birthday party, and how jazzed she would be, like how amazing would that be for this young scholar who's already very much influenced by Ricardo Flores Magón. So like imagine that were the case. And so this kind of anarchist very much what was on a lot of my yearbooks in middle school, is very much what's fueling their ideologies. It's this form of anarchism. And you think of anarchists as these very specific punk kind of people, but it's very much rooted in all these other international experiences and very specific ways of thinking about challenging governments. Anyway, so that's what's informing that top image. And then the second one, ACAB. So that's, let's say it's all cops are bullies, wink. So this is if Emma Tenayuca is like kind of like she's a radical. So I put her in this kind of rock and roll stance and with tats, because I was just imagining that, it's funny that in this image where she's in prison, she's smiling. She's like, what are you going to do? It's this very resilient image. And it reminds me of this internet experience where it's deal with it, and then these glasses come down on someone. So it's kind of animation that's meant to punctuate someone's kind of confronting nature to something. So I was imagining that she was kind of in that headspace where she was just like, and what, basically, to the cops in San Antonio at that time, because she was jailed many times. And also the bright colored approach to this is also combating the black and white photo. That's usually how we see these figures, is black and white. So their world is not colorful. And it reminded me of learning about the young lords out of New York, and how, and a lot of their photos are in black and white, but how purple was integral to their practice. And I was thinking of doing the exact opposite of what we think of black and white photographs to be and prison to be. There's a very gray space of really punching up the color to interpret it a completely different way. And while the black and white version of the zine is fine too, this is kind of just a little bit more of a color exploration for me personally. So all these kind of nuances from the research are the reason why I went with this design. But of course, there are other approaches where you can just, it's open to interpretation. There's no right way to interpret information. And that's the beauty of the zine. That's the beauty of, obviously, visual art in general. But for me, as someone who's constantly working with a specific writing systems that's based on text, it's nice to take a break and so just have this visual interpretation of something where I'm not, slogging down and writing in a zine. And Emma Tenayuca was born in XYZ. I think the other publications do that, and this is the zine, you can do a little bit more. Anyway, so now what are you going to do with this zine? Well, so you have your zine. So now what? Well, you can just have it, but you can also now begin to embrace zine culture and support other zinesters, people who create zines. So where can you find this? Well, number one, always support your local zinester. You try and look for festivals. For example, San Antonio has San Antonio Zine Fest, which is, it's a great festival featuring several zinesters from all over the state and the country, the region, you name it. And again, all these are very affordable. Oftentimes you can do zine trades where you have a zine and you trade that with someone else and they give you your zine. So there's not a specific economy to this where it has to have specific price points and so forth. It's definitely this camaraderie experience of zine exchange. And there's also independent bookstores, for example, Monkey Wrench. That was one of the first bookstores that carried our zine, Chingo Zine. And we were so shocked to see, that someone wanted to have it and sell it and really supported it. And it's great. And that's why you should support your local bookstore. And there's also libraries. Librarians are so radical. They're so rock and roll. They are always ahead of the curve. They were collecting zines, like our zines, from early on. And most major libraries have a zine collection. So there are also local zine libraries too. For example, Sherwood Forest Zine Library at Boston. Another space is to go online. Etsy, Big Cartel, artist websites. For example, Curandera Press, this is Julia Arendando out of Chicago. She has this great series, and it only sells for like $5. The price points are very low, but the quality is there. Everybody puts all these interest into it, and it always has these nice personal touches. But that's another space to go, is online. And everybody's usually so friendly in these spaces. I put this image of Santa Sucia. This is a zine group out of San Antonio, Isabel and Natasha. And that's how it looks when you approach someone's table at these types of events, like a zine festival or something like that, or a zine party. everyone is usually really happy to see you and upbeat. So it's a nice community that definitely supports one another. And once you start making zines, no matter the quote unquote the quality, because there's no bad zine, it's just it's rock and roll, it's all good. So they're there to welcome you with open arms to this community. So congratulations on finishing the zine, and thank you for sticking around and talking a little bit about zine history, making the zine, and learning about Emma Tenayuca. And hopefully this inspires you to make many more zines in the future. Thanks.